Elena Marquez had always dreamed of seeing the stars up close, but nothing in her training prepared her for the silence that swallowed her once she stepped outside the station. Andrei Volkov floated a few meters away, his suit lights blinking faintly in the dark, but when Elena glanced at him again, he wasn't there anymore. In his place, drifting slowly where Andrei had been, was a second Elena, same suit, same mission patch, same terrified face, staring back at her from behind the glass. The silence of space has a weight to it, heavier than anything I could have prepared for. I had read about it, trained for it, but none of the manuals or simulations ever captured how it truly feels when you re-out here, tethered to a fragile line, floating against an ocean of endless black. My breaths were loud inside the helmet, echoing like waves against glass, and each exhale fogged the visor for just a fraction of a second before vanishing. Earth stretched below me in magnificent colors, a glowing sphere of blue oceans and white storms that should have filled me with awe. Instead, it felt distant, unreal, almost unreachable. The longer I stared, the more it felt like I was looking at something I had lost forever. I was stationed at the far end of the platform, replacing a loose panel. My gloves clutched the tools tightly, careful not to let them float away. The tether tugged lightly at my waist with every motion, a reminder that one wrong move would mean drifting into oblivion. The stars out here don't twinkle like they do from Earth, they're sharp, piercing like pinholes stabbed into the fabric of existence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from within them, some unseen gaze hidden in the shadows between the lights. At first I tried to ignore it. Astronauts aren't supposed to let nerves get the better of them. Focus, stay calm, finish the task. I told myself the unease was just the mind playing tricks, a side effect of isolation and the vastness of the void. But as I worked, I kept noticing flickers at the edge of my vision. Quick movements, like shadows darting across the stars. Each time I turned my head, there was nothing, just emptiness. My pulse picked up and I tried to slow my breathing, but the sound of it only made me more aware of how trapped I was inside my suit. The panel clicked back into place, and I let out a shaky sigh of relief. One small victory. I started to gather my tools ready to return inside, but then my visor caught something strange. Smudges. At first, I thought it was dust or grease, but that made no sense in the vacuum. I leaned closer to the reflection of the station's metal frame and froze. They weren't smudges. They were handprints. They were faint, but unmistakable, 5 long fingers pressed against the inside of my helmet's visor, the marks foggy and uneven, as though someone had touched it from within. I raised a gloved hand instinctively, trying to wipe them away, but my palm only brushed against the smooth surface of the glass. The prints didn't budge. They weren't on the outside. They were beneath the glass. A cold weight sank into my chest, heavier than gravity could ever be. I stared, my breathing turning shallow. The prints looked old, blurred, as though they had been there a while, but how? This helmet was mine, checked, sealed, and safe. Nothing could have gotten inside. Nothing should have been able to leave marks like that. And yet they were there, mocking me with their impossible presence. I tried to steady myself, forcing reason into the moment. Maybe condensation, maybe some chemical reaction, maybe anything but what my mind wanted to imagine. But deep down I knew there was no logical explanation. My suit was airtight, secure, and sterile. Those prints didn't belong to me. The tether tugged gently as the platform shifted, pulling me back to the station. The sight of the open airlock ahead should have been comforting, a promise of safety, but instead it filled me with dread. If something could leave its mark inside my helmet, then the station wasn't safety, it was a trap waiting to close around me. I glanced once more into the void, half expecting to see someone or something floating just beyond sight, but the stars remained sharp and indifferent, as though the universe itself refused to acknowledge me. I turned back toward the airlock, my chest tight, my hands trembling despite the gloves. As I drifted closer, the earth below glowed beautifully, but I could no longer see it as home. All I could think about were those prints, etched into the glass inches from my face, proof that I wasn't alone out here. And for the first time, I wished I was falling, plummeting back into the atmosphere, burning away into nothing rather than being left to float here in the dark with something that should not exist. When I blinked, the prints were gone. But in their place, faint against the curve of the visor, I saw the outline of another face pressed against the glass. I couldn't look away from that faint outline pressed against my visor. It was there only for a moment, a blur of features too close, too wrong, like a face leaning in from the other side of the glass. Then it was gone, vanishing as if it had never been. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing in my ears louder than the silence outside. I wanted to believe it was just exhaustion, a trick of light and shadow, but the unease clawing at me told me otherwise. Something was here, and it wanted me to notice. I pushed myself back toward the airlock, the tether pulling me along like a lifeline. My gloves gripped the handles and I dragged myself inside, shutting out the infinite black behind me. Relief should have washed over me, but the airlock didn't feel right. It was too dark, too cold. I cycled the chamber, listening for the familiar hiss of atmosphere filling the small space. But the sound was faint, weaker than usual, like the station itself was struggling to breathe. When the inner door opened, I floated into the corridor. Immediately, I noticed how different everything felt. The hum of machinery that always filled the background was gone, replaced by a dead silence. The walls were lined with floating tools and papers, drifting slowly, as if they'd been left untouched for far too long. I tried to steady myself, to tell myself the others were somewhere deeper inside, maybe asleep, maybe busy. But the thought wouldn't take root. I moved through the dim passage, the beam of my headlamp cutting through the darkness in shaky arcs. Every shadow looked alive. I passed the crew quarters and felt my stomach sink when I saw the bunks. Each one was empty. Sheets floated loose, unmade, as though the occupants had vanished mid. My breath quickened, fogging my visor for seconds at a time, and every time it cleared, I almost expected someone to be floating just inches from my face. But there was no one. Just emptiness. I pushed on toward the central hub, trying to anchor myself to routine. The mission log, the control systems, the heart of the station, all of it should have given me answers. But as I reached the hub, I froze. The windows that usually glowed with faint blue light from the control panels were pitch black. The screens flickered with weak static, casting pale flashes across the room. My reflection appeared in the nearest screen, distorted, warped by the fuzz. I leaned closer, desperate for some sign of data, something to ground me. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The reflection was wrong. It mimicked my movements, but not perfectly. The tilt of the head was slower, the blink delayed. My hands shook, but in the screen they were perfectly steady. I blinked again, and the reflection didn't. My breath caught as its visor fogged, even though mine didn't. Then its helmet filled with shapes, dark marks spreading across the inside, like more handprints pressed against the glass. I recoiled, slamming against the wall, the tools on my belt clattering in the weightlessness. When I looked back at the screen, it was only static again. My reflection was gone. The station felt colder, emptier, as though the walls themselves had pulled back to reveal some hollow shell. I drifted further down the corridor toward the galley. The metallic surfaces glimmered faintly under my light, but there was something else carved into the walls. Scratches, deep gouges, uneven, jagged, as if something with claws had dragged across the metal in wild desperation. The marks stretched long, running down toward the hatch, as though whatever made them had been trying to escape. I reached out, running a gloved hand across the grooves. They were sharp, fresh, untouched by the usual wear and dust of the station. My chest tightened. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't the absence of my crew. This was something else. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating, though I knew there was no air here at all, just pressurized atmosphere keeping me alive. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then steadied again, and in that brief moment of darkness, I thought I saw movement, not behind me, but crawling across the ceiling, slipping out of sight as the light returned. I spun, sweeping the beam across the walls and corners, but there was nothing there, just floating objects, scratches in the metal, and silence so deep it made my skin crawl. I told myself I needed to find the others, that they had to be somewhere, but another part of me whispered the truth I didn't want to face. They were gone, and I wasn't supposed to be here either. As I drifted back toward the hub, something caught my eye. On the far wall, in the condensation of the viewport, words were traced out by a hand that shouldn't exist. The letters were jagged, uneven, but clear enough to read, "Not alone." The words written on the viewport stayed with me, etched into my mind as deeply as they were into the condensation on the glass. Not alone. I wanted to wipe them away, to convince myself they were just a trick of my imagination, but they were too clear, too precise. Someone or something had left them for me to see. My hands shook as I floated backward, the beam of my headlamp trembling across the walls, the scratches in the metal, the silence that felt heavier than sound, the wrongness in my reflection. It all led to one conclusion I didn't want to accept. There was something here with me. The air felt colder as I drifted down the passage. I tried to control my breathing, but each inhale rattled against the inside of my helmet. Louder, harsher, as though the suit itself was struggling to keep me alive. I passed by the crew quarters again, and this time, I forced myself to look more closely. The bunks were empty, but small details caught my eye. A book floated in the air, its pages torn and curling as if from a sudden force. A photograph of one of the crew's families spun slowly in the weightlessness, the smiling faces twisting with every rotation. None of it looked abandoned, it looked interrupted, frozen in time at the very moment everything went wrong. The longer I stared, the more the silence pressed in. I realized then what was missing. Not just the sound of voices or machinery, but the sound of the station itself. No hum of air systems, no distant rattle of pumps, not even the faint vibration that always ran through the walls. It was as if the entire structure had been hollowed out, gutted, left as nothing more than a shell. I pulled myself toward the control room, desperate for answers. My gloved hand clutched the handles along the corridor as I floated into the hub again. The static screens flickered faintly, lighting the room in stuttering flashes. I tried to focus on the instruments, hoping for data logs, anything. But every screen was the same white noise, broken signals. My reflection appeared again, scattered across the monitors. I turned my head left, and so did it. I raised a hand, and so did it. For a moment, relief surged through me. Maybe the first time had been my imagination. Then the reflection stopped. My hand remained raised, but the image in the screen lowered its own. Slowly, deliberately, my stomach dropped. It stared back at me with the same posture, the same helmet, but its movements were no longer mine. My chest tightened as I watched the reflection lean forward in the glass, closer and closer, until its visor filled the entire screen. Inside the helmet, its face began to take shape. Not my face, not exactly. It was distorted, stretched, features twisted into something inhuman. And then it smiled. A wide, unnatural grin spreading too far, exposing teeth that were far too sharp. I couldn't breathe. The static sputtered, and in a blink, the screen was empty again. I pushed myself back, colliding with the wall, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might crack my ribs. I didn't want to look again, didn't want to see what was hiding behind that glass. But everywhere I turned, more reflective surfaces caught my eye, metal panels, polished instruments in each of them. For just a second, I thought I saw that same wrong smile staring back. I needed to leave the hub. I pulled myself into the corridor, this time heading toward the galley. My headlamp swept the room, and my stomach lurched at what I found. Floating in the center were droplets of water, hundreds of them, shimmering like tiny jewels in the beam of my light. They drifted in perfect stillness, untouched, as though time itself had stopped them midair. I followed them with my eyes until I saw where they came from. The walls were wet. Not just condensation, but soaked, streaked with long trails that led toward the ceiling. The stains glistened under the light, too thick to be water, too dark. I felt bile rise in my throat. It looked like blood smeared upward, defying gravity, painted in arcs across the walls. My breathing turned shallow, rapid. I wanted to flee, but my body refused to move. That was when I noticed the shapes between the droplets, but they hung in the shadows at the far side of the galley, motionless in zero gravity. My crewmates, their faces were pale, their eyes wide, their mouths open in silent screams, their limbs twisted at impossible angles, bent as though crushed by some invisible weight. I froze, staring at them, my mind screaming at me to accept what I was seeing, but every part of me refused. Then, as my light swept across their faces, one of them shifted. Not the whole body, just the head. It turned slowly, impossibly, until its lifeless eyes locked directly with mine. The moment those lifeless eyes turned toward me, I froze. My lungs felt locked, refusing to take in air. As if my body understood something, my mind still resisted. The corpse drifted weightlessly, head twisted too far on its neck, yet its gaze never left me. I wanted to scream, but the sound would have gone nowhere inside the helmet, trapped with me, echoing back like everything else. My gloved hand shook as I reached out toward the wall, trying to push myself away from the galley. But even the smallest movement felt like it would draw their attention. The beam of my headlamp shook across their pale faces. The other bodies remained still, mouths open, eyes frozen, but that one head continued to follow me, as though something behind its empty eyes was still alive. Slowly I forced myself backward, drifting toward the hatch. My breathing grew rapid, harsh, fogging my visor with every exhale. The fog cleared, then came back, each time revealing the same gaze locked on me. I pushed through the hatch and pulled it shut, the sound of the latch clicking echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The corridor stretched long and dim, shadows clinging to the corners as if they were alive. I gripped the handles and dragged myself forward, but each turn led me somewhere I had already been. I passed the crew quarters again, though I had gone in the opposite direction. Then I saw the galley hatch again, though I was sure I had left it behind. The station felt twisted, bent out of shape, as if the corridors were rearranging themselves to trap me inside a maze. I tried to calm myself, to focus, but the dread inside me grew heavier. The light from my headlamp flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I saw movement at the far end of the corridor. A figure floated there, barely visible, its outline jagged and wrong. When the light steadied, it was gone. I blinked hard, unsure if I had really seen it, but the memory of its shape burned in my vision. My hands pulled me down another stretch of corridor, this one unfamiliar. The walls here were scratched, not in random claw marks like before, but in patterns, lines crisscrossed in spirals, symbols etched deep into the metal as though carved with fury. I trailed my glove along them, and a shiver ran through me. The grooves were fresh, sharp-edged, as if they had been made only moments before I arrived. The symbols made no sense, yet the longer I stared, the more I felt as though they were watching me. I forced myself onward until I reached another viewport. I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't stop myself. Earth hung below, beautiful and distant, a glowing world of life, yet something was wrong. The continents were dark, the cities that should have glimmered with light were black. The planet looked dead, lifeless, as if all of humanity had been snuffed out while I floated here in silence. My chest heaved and I tore my gaze away, refusing to believe it. I drifted back through the corridor, heading toward the control hub again, praying that it would make more sense this time. But when I reached it, the static screens were brighter now, flickering faster, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. I stared into them, waiting for the reflection, waiting for the wrongness to return, and it did. The reflection leaned closer in the glass, tilting its head as if studying me. My own helmet was fogged with breath, but its visor was clear. Its eyes was clear. Its eyes, my eyes were wide and hollow, black voids that swallowed the light. Slowly, it raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the screen. My chest tightened as I remembered the prints on my visor. The reflection's hand stayed pressed there, unmoving, and though the screen was flat, I could swear the glass bulged outward under its palm. I pulled back, heart racing, but every other monitor in the room lit up. My reflection was in all of them now, surrounding me, every screen filled with that smiling, twisted version of myself. Their mouths began to move, opening wider and wider, but no sound came out. Still, I heard something not through my ears but inside my head, a whisper, crawling through my thoughts like insects. It wasn't words at first, just static and distortion, but then it formed a single command. Let go. The lights in the hub flickered, then died, leaving me in complete darkness. I floated there, frozen, listening to my own panicked breaths. When the emergency lights blinked back to life, the room was empty again. The screens were dark. But behind me, reflected in the viewport, the twisted version of myself hovered just inches away, smiling. The reflection in the viewport stayed with me, too close, too real. Its twisted grin curving wider than my face could ever manage. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself not to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to confirm it was there, but I knew if I did, I might see something I couldn't recover from. My heart pounded like it wanted to tear through my chest, each beat rattling inside the helmet until I could barely hear anything else. I shut my eyes, trying to will it away, but the darkness was worse. In the black behind my eyelids, I could still see it in my face, stretched into something inhuman, teeth sharp and endless, eyes hollow and hungry. When I finally opened my eyes, the reflection was gone, the viewport showing only the curve of Earth below. But the relief didn't last. Earth looked wrong again, darker than before, vast swaths of it swallowed in shadow as though the planet itself was rotting. Clouds moved strangely, spiraling in impossible patterns, and for a moment I thought I could see faces forming in them, screaming upward into space. I pushed myself away from the window, my hands trembling so hard they barely kept their grip on the handles. I needed to reach the escape pod. That thought burned in my mind like the last ember of survival. If the station was cursed, if something had invaded it, maybe I could still get away. The corridors bent and twisted, but I forced myself to push forward, dragging my body through the maze as though sheer will alone could bend the place back to reality. The station groaned around me, metal echoing like the sound of a dying creature. I couldn't tell if it was just the structure settling, or if something was moving through the walls themselves. When I finally reached the hatch leading to the escape bay, I almost broke down in relief. The lights above the door flickered weakly, but they were still on, still functioning. I pulled myself through, praying that the pod would be intact, that its systems had indeed been swallowed by the same decay that had infected the rest of the station. The hatch to the pod stood open, waiting. I drifted closer, reaching out with a gloved hand, but froze when I saw movement inside. A figure sat strapped into the pilot's seat. My pulse spiked. At first I hoped it was one of my crewmates. Maybe someone had made it here before me. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. But then I saw the suit. It was mine. The same scratches and smudges on the visor, the same mission patch on the shoulder, every detail identical. My heart thundered as I stared at the figure, its head slowly turning toward me. The visor caught the dim light, and I saw myself staring back, but not the way I should look. The reflection's grin stretched wide again, impossibly wide, and I knew then that it wasn't another survivor. It was the thing that had been following me through every screen, every window, every shadow. My hand shook as I clutched the frame of the hatch. The air in my suit felt thin, like I was suffocating, though the systems told me everything was normal. The other me raised a hand, mirroring my grip on the hatch, as if mocking me. Behind its visor, my face pressed closer, and though the glass separated us, I felt its presence leaking into me, crawling under my skin, filling my head with whispers. "Let go," it said again, but now the words were clear, spoken inside my mind with a voice that was mine and not mine at the same time. I tried to fight it, to cling to the thought of Earth, of safety, of escape, but the image of that darkened planet below filled me with dread instead of hope. I wasn't sure if anything alive remained down there. I wasn't sure if escape even meant anything anymore. I backed away from the hatch, trembling, but the pod's figure didn't stay seated. Slowly it unbuckled its restraints, its movements deliberate, methodical, like a predator drawing out the inevitable. My throat went dry as I watched it float forward, closing the distance between us. Its smile never faltered, never shifted, as though it had been carved into its face. I turned, forcing my body through the corridor, but every reflective surface betrayed me. In each glimmer of metal, in every piece of polished glass, it was there, moving closer, always closer. No matter how fast I pushed myself, I couldn't escape it. It wasn't behind me or ahead of me. It was inside the station, inside the suit, inside me. By the time I reached another viewport, I could barely breathe. My visor fogged with every ragged gasp, and when it cleared, I saw my reflection again, waiting. But this time there was no grin, no hollow eyes. It looked exactly like me. Exhausted, terrified. I wanted to believe it was real, but then its lips moved, whispering words I didn't hear with my ears, only in my head. "You were never alone." And then the viewport cracked, a thin line spreading across the glass like a fracture in bone. I stumbled back, watching as the crack widened, spiderwebbing outward. The reflection smiled one last time before the glass shattered completely, and all I saw was the black void rushing in to claim me. Or maybe it wasn't the void at all. Maybe it was finally letting itself out.